Alright, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to look at adding Redux to change how our articles are loaded. This will have the advantage of taking the content out of our bundles, and it will require adding some Redux actions and reducers, as well as an API endpoint that serves the markdown. We're going to start where we left off in the last episode. If you need to catch up, check out Redux. Right now we have an article component inside source components. Let's cd into source components. And we're going to copy that article component. We're going to call it draft article. So now we have two, and we're going to keep draft article for later, so we can still use it when updating the article in development. Alright, so now let's cd out of this, back into root, and we're going to install Redux. Let's npm install Redux and React Redux. Alright, cool. So now let's cd into source, and we're going to create three files. Redux requires a store.js, actions. These are the three principal parts to a Redux store. Okay, so now we should have a store.js, a reducers.js, and an actions.js. So now inside store.js, we're going to create a very simple store. We start by importing create store from Redux. We export default, create store, and we're going to add a reducer to this function. So let's import the reducer. Let's import test reducer from reducers. Say test reducer. And that's all there is to it to create a store. We can also add an initial state if we wish as the second argument. And we can put whatever we want here. So now that we've imported a test reducer, let's implement that. In reducers, let's export const test reducer, and every reducer is a function. That function has two arguments, a state and an action. Alright, now inside most reducers, we're going to use a switch statement. I think switch looks better than the if statements. We switch on action type. So as the default, we just want to return state. But in case it's our action, we'd actually like to return something. So we're going to return the state object, and we're going to spread state on it to get the old state. And then we're going to add something new. We're going to add text, action text. We're going to call this action test action. So now whenever there's a test action, there should also be an action text. So let's implement that action. So we go to actions.js. In actions.js, let's export a constant. We'll call it action test. And this is a function. This function takes one argument, and that's some text. And it returns an object, which will be our action object. Every action object has a type. In this case, we want our type to be test action. So it'll hit this particular action. We also want it to have a payload, a piece of data that will add to our state. In this case, text is something we want to add to our state. So we can say text equals text, or an ES6, just like this. Cool. So now we have actions, we have a reducer, and we have a store. Last thing we need to do is add this to React. So inside app.js, let's import the provider from React Redux. And we're going to wrap that provider around our app container, passing it the store. So let's import the store. So now the store is hooked up to our React components. That's pretty much it for the client side. Now let's get the server side started. In render.js, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take provider and store, and we're going to import them. And then down inside render to string, we're going to add our provider, passing it the store. So very similar to the client side. So now let's test it out. Inside of article.js, we've got a bunch of old stuff that we don't need anymore. Markdown data comes from the require, so we can take that out. Let's also take out the poster style, and we'll change markdown data to props. We'll also pull out the about image, which shouldn't be in the article anyway. Alright, now in order to connect article to React Redux, we need to use the connect method. So we'll import connect from React Redux. And we'll say export default connect. And as the first argument of connect, we need to put our map state to props. And then that will return a function, which we can then pass our article into. So map state to props can just be an anonymous function right here. So we can say state, fat arrow, and then we'll return an object. Now we can see that we have props underscore underscore content and props title. Let's say title equals state text and underscore underscore content equals state text. All right, so we're getting the state from our store, creating props out of it, and passing that all to article. Right now article doesn't exist because we're still exporting default. So let's set up a const article, make that equal to the function. All right, so now we're ready to get it going. Let's npm run dev, see where we're at. We have a problem in render.js. This should not be store, it should back up one because we're in server and store is in source. So now if we go to link local article, we can see we have an error. For Babel doesn't understand the spread operator yet. That's all right. Let's just add that. So in Babel RC, we'll add a new plugin. The plugin is transform object rest spread. If you don't have that plugin installed, simply npm install Babel plugin transform object rest spread. And then I'll give you the Babel plugin that you need to get the spread operator working. So now when we restart our server, it's working. It'll say article not found because we're not on one of our post or post 2. Okay, so now we're here. We don't have any data on the props. It's because we didn't set it. So let's say we went to create store and set up an initial state. We can say text test as the initial state, and test shows up as both the heading and the content. We place it as both the heading and the content. So now we have a working implementation of Redux. So our initial state is test. What if inside app.js, before the render, we took our store and we dispatched an action. The action is called action test. So we'll dispatch action test and give it some text. Now we just need to import the action from actions. When it restarts, we see the store is no longer text, it's new text, because we just updated it. Store.dispatch is how we're going to do all of our work in Redux. And I wanted to show it here to show that you can really put it anywhere. It doesn't have to be in an event, it's just something the store does, and it updates and mutates the state of the application. Alright, so now that we have that set up, there's one more thing I'd like to get working in this episode, and that's the Redux Devtools. If you Google Redux Chrome extension, it'll be the first link. So mine's already added, but click this green button to add it to Chrome. So now inside your console, you can see you have a Redux right next to React. If you click on it, it's going to say no store found. Make sure to follow the instructions. And so those instructions are right here. And it turns out that all you need to do to add Redux Devtools to your store is to include this. So let's say we call this enhancer. And we'll create a const enhancer. That const is going to check if window is available and if it equals object. Then it's going to look for window Redux Devtools extension. That has 2 underscores on each side. And finally we'll say window Redux Devtools extension and call it. So the return of this will be a function that will be installed here. And go back to our web browser and reload. It's npm run dev, and we'll see what happens. Cool, so now we reloaded and we see we have the Redux Devtools right here. It includes the state, any changes in the state, any actions that were committed, and you can move backwards and forwards between actions as they're committed in future episodes as we add more Redux actions. Alright, so in this episode we got set up with Redux and dispatched our first action from the Redux store. We saw how we can include Redux in both client and the server, so as to prepare us for the next steps. If you need to catch up, get checkout Redux final. Next, we'll build out our store, action and reducer knowledge with asynchronous actions. We'll set up Redux Thunk and build a simple express endpoint from which we'll fetch our data. See you there.